On today's World Insight, the rise of trade barriers amid a global transition to clean energy and green industries. How can the economic transition be protected from such trade hurdles? Columbia University European Studies scholar Adam Tooze with some answers. And China pioneers groundbreaking high-tech research through visionaries like Xue Qikun, an academician of the Chinese Academy of Sciences.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian in Dalian. This is our special program, Updates from Summer Davos. The 15th annual meeting of new champions wrapped up on Thursday. On the very last day of AMNC, CGTN and World Economic Forum jointly produced a panel on China's economic outlook. We checked the realities of the Chinese economy, headwinds and challenges it faces, and its potential for high-quality growth. Here are some excerpts.
There is a fundamental structural change that is underway that has to do with new technologies and that has to do with climate change. And China is spearheading that structural transformation by actually starting very early. You know, part of the success for EVs and solar panels is that they started much earlier than a lot of the Western economies did. China's rise, because of the global supply chain, has also pulled up the economic development of many of the neighboring developing countries.
What it needs to do is to create a market-based financial system that does a good job of allocating credit. Now, markets do make mistakes. Free financial markets do make mistakes, but the right way to think about it is to have effective regulation in place and to have the right incentives in place so that the financial sector does the right thing, and then the mistakes, when they happen, can be rectified.
China is very important to the global economy, not just the global business community, but to the global economy. I mean, if you just look at the 5% growth that we're very confident that we'll achieve this year, that 5% growth will already add more to the global GDP than India, Indonesia, Japan combined. So even a so-called slowed down growth of China is actually incredibly relevant for the global economy.
And that's some excerpts from a panel I moderated on Thursday on the topic of China's economic outlook. It is a panel, a joint production by the World Economic Forum and CGTN. The whole discussion will be brought to you later in the week. Stay tuned. At Summer Davos this year, participants remain resilient against the headwinds and the challenges and articulated on the solutions collectively. Related to this discussion, I had a chat with Adam Tooze, a historian, a professor, and also director of European Institute at Columbia University. He offered his unique perspectives. We see the rise of nationalism in international trade. So how do you see this reflected on the issue, for example, in electronic vehicles? Some wonder about what this precedence might set for future discussions about important issues of trade of the day, and what this might mean for the global collective approach earlier toward green transformation and other global issues.
The question, and I think it's the crucial question that you pose, is the future. And if we are addressing a problem like climate change, which is so urgent, we need to get to net zero between 2050 and 2060. What does overcapacity mean in this context? Do we want more green vehicles or more batteries and more photovoltaic cells or not? If you look at the climate crisis, the answer is very simple: we want more. The problem from the Western point of view is that in democratic systems, you have to build majorities for tough collective societal choices like this. And in that game, you have to stabilize coalitions of actors in support of the policies that you're doing. And if the green energy transition, like it or not, becomes identified with an invasion of Chinese goods that swamp key traditional legacy industries in Europe in particular, but also the United States, it makes it very difficult to continue the energy transition. So what is needed is diplomacy, what is needed is bargaining, not simple rules, not WTO old style, something more like in the 1980s or 1990s, where you explicitly bargain over the political tolerance levels of what can be done and how we strategically direct these capacities that are being built.
Right.
A positive sum game, ideally of more and more subsidy for more and more accelerated transition,
Right.
and not a negative game.
A word I heard a lot these days, buzzword, climate justice.
Yes.
Back in the 1990s and early 21st century, you see some of the fossil fuel centers, mainly coal mines
Yes.
in China, went out of business.
Yes.
Jobs were lost.
Yeah.
In the Chinese way, people understood it as so-called eat the bitterness.
Yes.
You only eat the bitterness to overcome the current stage of challenges and graduate to the next one.
Yeah.
At that time, nobody knows the word climate justice. But a lot of people did exactly that in order to achieve it.
Yeah.
So no transformation is spirit-free, trouble-free,
No.
pain-free.
Is always going to appear grander, and it is always going to be on a larger scale. And the transition that you have ahead of yourselves to meet the objective of net zero by 2060 dwarfs anything.
Before 2060.
Before 2060
Yeah.
dwarfs anything that is ahead of the West. You
But
have
we
to
are
do-
part of you
You have to do a hairpin.
because everybody has to do their job.
Right. And so the question then is, how do we think about the relative national trajectories and what is the tolerance threshold of the different actors in the system? And the central question for the renewable energy, the green energy sector in China, is not exports. Exports are important, but the argument that China is not dumping is absolutely solid, right? China makes even more profit. The Chinese producers make even more profit in
Indeed,
Europe than they do
inside,
at home.
yeah.
The crucial question for China is the momentum of the domestic transition and the extraordinarily difficult trade-offs that are going to be faced here. So my view of the, shall we say, the new model of great power relations in the course of the energy transition is that we have to find each other's tolerance thresholds. We have to, above all, focus on the domestic transition in each case and figure out how we can help each other. This is going to be very stressful for everyone. The fewer demands we make on each other, the better. The more we can offer each other, the better.
But still, people want to ask that question: why is issues being phrased shaped in such a way? There can be better discussions, and even fairer discussions about what the solutions might be.
Yes. I mean, I don't think we can get away from the fact that the issue of primacy is at stake. The issues of primacy is at stake. There are more and less sophisticated ways of putting this on the American side, but if you scratch at all the surface, ultimately the question is who's number one, who is the dominant player. And in the climate space,
It's about power.
It's about power, and it's about preeminence, and it's about the narrative. And the climate space is particularly complex in this respect because Western scientists discovered the problem, and the people who drove it pointed the finger at the West. This was the original climate justice formulation and said, you, the Europeans and the Americans, are responsible for the climate problem. Right? And historically speaking, in legacy terms, our accumulated emissions are still larger than those of China. But as China grew explosively, exactly as you described it, this sudden surge from 2000 onwards, huge, huge increases, China is now responsible for 30% of global climate emissions. And therefore, de facto, the future of the world, everyone's destiny lies in China's hands.
But it's also the biggest player taking advantage of renewable energies right now in the world.
And it understands it as a positive opportunity and has had, you know, I was in the
And
room.
how come that is not being portrayed in the same balance in the world as the biggest emitter of the world? That's another interesting question.
Because we're in the phase of transition. Like, you know, economists wait for Chinese GDP to be larger than that of the United States, other than purchasing power parity terms. The American military obsessed with the balance. But in the climate space, China blew through America's emissions in 2006. And as you're saying, it is now, because it's an electro state, because China grew its electricity sector so quickly, it also innovates in that space much more energetically. And China invests 40% of GDP. So in terms of your investment, your capital goods sectors, the pace at which you build transmission lines, ultra-high voltage transmission lines, like no one else in the world has. A series of decisions taken around 2005 in EV and in transmission. I was in the room with the innovators that did this 20 years ago. It's like being in a room with Henry Ford. Like, it's just, oh my God, these are the men who actually saw this future. And for the West, say legacy car producers in Europe, who think of themselves as the granddaddies of motor car, internal combustion engine manufacturer, VW, that was for so long the preeminent brand in China as well, providing Santanas to everyone in China, right? To let go of that, it's a staggering shock to identity, to the self-conception.
You are a professor of history and European studies. So at this stage, when you see the world, when the U.S. wants to shape it as U.S.-China rivalry, even though China did not agree with that, but anyway, that's what Washington has been doing over the past years. What kind of advice would you give to Europe or to major capitals in Europe and also to Brussels, where the EU is?
I think the fundamental challenge for Europe, and this is what's interesting about Europe, is that Europe doesn't have a settled constitution. So to that extent, it's more in the same position of China as being a socio-political system, constantly having to innovate and think through the way it understands the modern world. It doesn't have a classicism. You can't point to something in the 18th century and say, the founding fathers of Europe said this is how we should do things, right? You have to innovate. You have to be thinking about your 21st century version of what Europe is. And this, I think, creates possible synergies, possible forms of cooperation. Fundamentally, what Europe needs to do is strengthen itself. It needs to rely less on the United States, it needs to be more independent, it needs to chart its own course. That is, again, very difficult for the democratic political systems of Europe to manage. But potentially, I think there are a series of bargains on offer. One of them is the grand bargain in the energy transition space. Because unlike the United States, which is the world's leading oil producer now, Europe is an energy importer like China, and so there is a credible transition path. And the other obvious place for cooperation is global development. Africa is Europe's neighbor. China has for a long time been by far the biggest bilateral investor and lender to China, not through the multinational organizations, but bilaterally. We need to move to a more cooperative relationship in that crucial space.
You see interest groups based on countries try to hedge and the current situation to their best advantage. And as a result of that, you see a lot of movements, building blocks going on, changing all the time. How do you see this process, Professor Tooze, along the way? And earlier, you might compare them in history. Do you think there is any relevant examples that we can compare with?
I mean, generally speaking, I think that the idea of a new model of international relations, the idea that we're seeing changes not seen in a century, the Chinese formulation of the current moment as dramatically new, is much more helpful than historical analogy. The effect of taking historical analogy as your guide is essentially to take you back to a Eurocentric view. You end up basically looking at a world between, I don't know, Imperial Germany, the British Empire, the French Republic, then maybe Russia, the Ottoman Empire. And you don't actually see the drama of the current moment, which is precisely, as you're saying, that the planet has 8 billion inhabitants, and at least 30 to 40 states have really quite high level of competence. If you look at who, for instance, can manufacture drones now, it's a long, long list of countries with which you can deploy modern military power. If you ask who's capable of doing mid-level manufacturing, again, it's a really long list of countries. If you ask what the educational level of the number of college graduates is around the world, it's an explosive, and it should be a wonderful number, right? We should be celebrating this. But from the point of view of a great power vision of politics, it becomes a problem because you have to constantly figure out how to hegemonize all of these complex players. So you can see where you go to a stability reflex and you say you need a big brother to manage this. But I don't think that's adequate to the current moment. No, what we need is more sophisticated politics, compromise, recognition of each other's interests, genuine diplomacy, sustained conversation. But that, I think, is the only way to go. And to that extent, though I'm a historian, sometimes the role of the historian is to say, folks, actually, when you look at this, I think this is new. I don't think we've been here before. Because otherwise you have this problem. You know, Marx said this, the 18th Premier, like, you know, you make a revolution and you get dressed up in old clothes. Yeah. When a car comes along, you call it a horseless carriage. And of course, a car is a horseless carriage, but that's not the most interesting thing about it, right? We look at the world and we say, oh, well, it's imperialist competition again. And you say it's like before 1914. No, that is not the world that we're in, right? China is not like imperial Germany.
A lot of people these days that I talk to who are not politicians, they sincerely ask the question, what is the purpose of politics?
Yeah.
And they really doubt whether politicians are working with sincerity and ethics for their responsibilities. And I really wonder, from a historian's perspective, how do you see these questions keep on popping up these days in private conversations, meeting rooms, even on the streets?
Politics is clearly not about technological infrastructure, right? And it's not about fast-moving profit-seeking. And it's not about academic research and the pursuit of truth in that way. But it's fundamental, because what politics is about is collective meaning. Real politics, meaningful politics. There is cynical and corrupt politics, but important, meaningful, historically important politics is creative, collective meaning creation. It is meaningful speech in which we talk to each other and organize ourselves collectively. Because we can organize ourselves technologically, we can organize ourselves around a medium like money that flickers up and down and tells us whether to buy or to sell. But we also have to motivate ourselves and agree on the terms under which we're going to act together. And there are big, deep, hugely significant historical traditions, of which the party and the government in China represents one. Liberal democracies and constitutions represent another, which over long periods of time have been used to organize highly sophisticated societies. You look at China today, you look at Europe, you look at the United States. These are very complex social organisms articulated through technology and commerce, but also articulated around shared meaning and laws and understandings of where we're going and who we are. And business people and technologists who say, oh, we don't need politics, underestimate the significance of that kind of politics. Now, you might say right now, in some places, we have a deficit. I heard Graham Allison describe America's condition for the next 6 months as silly season, and a bit of me inside died. This is bad news. When politics becomes silly, we're in a really bad space. But politics per se is crucial to organizing how we function. And without it, or with the wrong kind of politics, we're in real trouble. Because it works. If you have an effective politician organizing collectivities around poisonous messages, antagonistic messages, you can do terrible, terrible damage. You can do worse than a cynical, corrupt politician, right? And politics is also about the prevention of the worst. You know, it's in part about a space in which we can organize collectively, but it is also, and I say this, of course, advisedly in view of what's going to happen in America on the 5th of November, it is also about choices between less bad options, which we also have to make regularly in our lives and in our collective existence. So I understand where that impatience for politics comes from, but we shouldn't share it. We should resist it. We should insist that this is crucial. Whichever version you like, whichever modality that you do, pursue it seriously.
You're watching World Insight. Still to come, China's pioneers in groundbreaking high-tech research through visionaries like Xue Qikun, an academician of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Stay tuned. It's not an easy time for real, honest discussions and sincere conversations. Yet, we know it's so important to do them now. This week, the annual meeting of the new champions aspires to be the platform to make them happen. From the seashores of Dalian, we are bringing to you the updates about the latest of the world, and also to meet the people from the world of business and innovation. Follow me to the meeting rooms and session halls and take in the world and China you need to know. Hello, this is World Insight. I'm Tian. China pins its hope on developing new quality productive forces in the fields of quantum technology, life sciences, and AI initiatives. Recently, Chinese President Xi Jinping underscored the importance of scientific and technological modernization and innovation in pursuing the Chinese modernization and high-quality development. Here is my conversation with Xue Qikun, an academician of the Chinese Academy of Sciences and president of the Southern University of Science and Technology. He is one of the 2 Chinese scientists who were awarded for the country's top Sci-Tech Award for the year 2023. As a leading scientist, he has led the collaborative research efforts with Tsinghua University's Institute of Physics, of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and also of Stanford University to tackle what he calls the formidable challenge of experimentally realizing the quantum anomalous Hall, or QAH effect. They achieved a significant scientific milestone by becoming the first in the world to experimentally observe the QAH effect in magnetic topological insulators. Now, that may sound technical. Well, the practical implications are extremely promising. It's believed that it has the potential to revolutionize low-energy electronic devices in the future. And here is my latest conversation with Professor Xue Qikun. Professor Xue, good to see you.
Nice to meet you, too.
Can you explain in average Joe's language exactly what it means? What are you working on, and why is it so significant to all of us?
As you know, the basic research, fundamental research, is for the understanding our nature. So what I discovered with the quantum anomaly effect is the new law of electron motion in our materials. For example, transistor is a special device to control the electron motion. Similarly, quantum anomaly allows the new law of the electron flow or motion in our materials. One of the unique feature of this effect is that the electron move around the edge of the materials or the devices with basically no energy consumption in principle. So certainly it's a new law of the electron motion, and similarly, at the same time, because of this dissipationless transport of electron, certainly we can imagine in the future we can use this new law of electron motion to develop low energy consumption electronics.
What you said reminds me of the latest challenge we're having about the artificial intelligence. One of the things is the energy that's needed for computational, how shall I say, computational operations.
As long as this quantum anomaly effect amplified, they can use the many different type of the electronic device. Certainly, I think the AI, some of the robots may use some of these devices. In this case, I'm sure the energy consumption will be much lower.
Tell me, how did you manage to eventually nail down the kind of areas that you are working on so much these days?
Yeah, so actually first very important thing is the research tool or research infrastructure or research platform we have. So for the last almost 30 years, one of my main efforts for the research or in my career to develop some of the new type of tool for the research. So one of them is the molecular beam epitaxy, scanning tunneling microscope, and angle resolved photoemission spectroscopy. In short, MB, STM, APEX combined very complicated system. That system allows us to control of the material at atomic level. Also, we can characterize the property of our materials at atomic level. This is very essential for the discovery of a quantum anomaly effect.
In order to improve the new quality productive forces, how far is your field from supporting to achieve that?
I think the scientists in our field or similar field really form the foundation for the future new quality productive power or the force, because technology in many ways initially developed from the breakthrough in the fundamental research. Like if you talk about the transistor, and the beginning is discovery in the physics of a semiconductor, but now it's already used anywhere in the world. So I think both science advancement and the technology development are equally important. So I'm very fortunate to be a scientist in the basic research. I think our effort, of course, is to eventually develop some technology, but we need is to take time to transfer a discovery in the science into a practical technology, then to the industry or economics. So we need all the people in the different aspect of the this chain
to work together.
Yeah, work together.
And also have the patience.
Yeah.
There's a lot of discussions about what needs to be done in order to really encourage basic science research, as you just said.
Yeah.
What do you think, Professor?
First, since our government realized the importance of the fundamental or basic research for the last 20 years, stable or even increasing the financial support or the other support have been put on the fundamental research. So that's a very good news for the scientists in our field. Another thing is we have to, optimize the current promotion or the, evaluation system. So for the basic research people, you cannot make the annual plan for the outcome, just like in the production line in the industry. So in this case,
greatness is not planned.
Right. Greatness never be planned that way. So we need to optimize or the reform the current promotion or evaluation system. So that's a very good that will be a very good encouragement for the scientists in this fundamental research.
And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of my team, thanks for tuning in, and bye for now.